For most of us, intimacy is about desire, connection, and love. But for the Spartans, it was none of those things. It was an order. It was a biological duty enforced by the state for one single mission: to build the deadliest human weapons the ancient world would ever see. Spartans weren't raised as people. They were manufactured as soldiers. And their creation didn't start on the battlefield. It began right in the bedroom. Forget the Hollywood movies with the red capes and the noble speeches. Behind the legend of the 300 lies a disturbing truth. It was a cold system of human engineering so severe that it makes the darkest modern dystopias look almost merciful. At the very core of this machine was total state control over having babies. In Sparta, personal choice meant absolutely nothing when it came to love or family. The government acted as the only matchmaker, pairing citizens based on raw strength, not sentiment. Old officials, men hardened by decades of war, examined young males like livestock, judging their height, stamina, and background. He was the tall, broad-shouldered warrior born of famous ancestors. She was the strong, fertile woman with wide hips and a sturdy frame. Beauty didn't matter for vanity, it only mattered as a sign of good health and better blood. Marriages were state-arranged, cold strategic unions meant to produce superior offspring. Love was irrelevant. Desire was optional. The body no longer belonged to the individual. It belonged to Sparta. Every citizen's duty was to strengthen the state through their bloodline. Women's roles were also twisted into something unfamiliar. They were not seen as wives or mothers, but as vessels of the Spartan nation. Their entire worth came from their ability to bear strong, healthy children. From an early age, Spartan girls trained not for combat, but for childbirth. They ran, wrestled, and threw javelins, all to condition their bodies to carry warriors. Their will didn't matter. Their bodies did. They were taught that their battlefield was the birthing bed, and their greatest honor was to bring forth a future soldier. But this system went even further into realms that seem almost monstrous today. What happened when a celebrated warrior's wife couldn't conceive? Or when she gave birth to weak children? What if, somewhere else, lived a woman of exceptional health married to an older, less impressive man? Sparta had an answer. A chilling rule in its social code. It allowed, and even encouraged, a strong warrior to father a child with another man's wife. It wasn't seen as cheating. It was a civic duty. A woman's womb could be loaned in service of the state, and often her husband agreed. Producing a strong child, even by another man, was considered an honor to the household and to Sparta itself. Concepts like love or faithfulness were crushed beneath the boots of state breeding programs. The goal wasn't happiness. It was the perfection of the bloodline. And so, when a Spartan child was finally born, it wasn't a time of celebration. It was a test. The newborn wasn't placed in its mother's arms but was taken to a grim place called the Gathering Hall. There, a group of aged warriors awaited. They had seen countless battles and looked at life through the eyes of death. They examined each infant without any emotion. Naked and trembling, the baby was inspected from head to toe. Its legs, its spine, its cry. Every flaw, every sign of weakness could seal its fate. It wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. To Spartan logic, it was necessity. They were a small warrior caste surrounded by enemies and enslaved populations who outnumbered them 10-1. In such a world, weakness meant danger, not just for one child, but for the entire state. A frail infant wasn't just a burden. It was a threat. Mercy today could mean destruction tomorrow. Sparta's creed was survival through strength. No exceptions. The council's decision was final. There was no appeal. If the baby passed the test, it was returned to its family. Not as a son, but as a future soldier already belonging to the state. From the moment he drew his first breath, a Spartan child's destiny was already decided. But if the elders' judgment turned against him, if they ruled he was unfit for life, he wasn't killed by a sword or drowned in a river. His end came in a way far colder. The infant was carried to the barren slopes of the mountains to a place called the deposits. There, in a dark cliff of stone, the newborn was left to the wind, the night frost, and the beasts. A quiet death, unseen and unspoken of. To Spartan logic, this was not murder. They believed they were merely returning the child to nature. What nature had produced imperfectly was a grim offering to collective strength. Passing the elders' inspection was only the beginning. From that moment, the child's life became a slow march toward war. And for his parents, duty did not end with birth. The state demanded a constant creation of new bodies to fuel its war machine. Having children in Sparta wasn't a privilege. It was an obligation. They practiced what we would later call selective breeding centuries before the word existed. The belief that humankind could be perfected through biology didn't begin in modern laboratories. It was born in these rocky hills. For the Spartans, it wasn't hatred that drove it, but ruthless practicality. Weakness had no place in their bloodline. To achieve this, the most private human act became a public duty. Love, as we understand it, had no place in the formula. Men lived from age 7 to 30 in communal barracks among their comrades. Husbands would sneak from camp under darkness to lie briefly with their wives, quietly, hurriedly, and vanish before sunrise to avoid punishment. There was no household life, no time to nurture affection. The wife was a stranger chosen for her body, not her heart. Their union had one goal: conception. Once a child was expected, the man returned to his true family, the army. The system was built to crush attachment, to ensure devotion only to Sparta. Strong family bonds were viewed as potential betrayal, and romantic love was a dangerous distraction. And so, the state punished those who refused to marry or reproduce. A man who stayed single beyond the required age was branded disloyal, a deserter of his civic duty. During certain festivals, these men were paraded naked through the freezing streets, forced to sing mocking songs about their own failure. They were denied the honors granted to respected elders, treated as outcasts, living proof that private life in Sparta was everyone's business. The cost of this ideology was immense. Compassion faded from daily life. Generation after generation was conditioned to believe tenderness was weakness. That one's body belonged not to the self but to the state. And that motherhood was not love but service. Children didn't learn affection from their parents. They learned obedience from their trainers. Mothers handed their sons to the state at 7, whispering only, "Return with your shield or on it." That phrase wasn't empty pride. It was the end point of a culture that had erased maternal love and replaced it with fanatic devotion to Sparta's glory. If reproduction was the forging and inspection was the testing, then at 7 years old came assembly, the true creation of the weapon. The state that engineered his birth now came to claim ownership. This was the beginning of the Agoge, the harshest and most effective training program ever devised by humankind. It was a system that shattered children and rebuilt them in the image of the perfect warrior. Picture it. You are 7, torn from the only warmth you've known. Your mother doesn't weep. She simply hands you over. From that moment, your new family is your training unit, your cold barracks. Your father becomes an instructor, not to teach reading or writing, but endurance. You will not live in a home again until you are 30. And by then, the word home will mean nothing. The first lesson of the training was simple and merciless. Comfort is the enemy. The Spartan boy slept on a bed he had to make himself, using reeds torn by hand from the riverbanks. No knife allowed. His only clothing was a single rough tunic, the same garment for the burning summers and the freezing winters. And above everything else, he was always hungry. The rations were intentionally tiny. A slow starvation planned with mathematical precision. Yet this hunger wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. The boys were ordered to make up the difference on their own through theft. In Sparta, stealing wasn't a crime. It was a lesson. It honed stealth, patience, and daring. A warrior who couldn't slip unseen into an enemy camp and steal food was worthless. So the boys learned to move like shadows through their own city, scavenging for scraps like wolves. But if you were caught, the punishment was merciless. You'd be whipped without pity, not for the act itself, but for being foolish enough to get caught. The sin was incompetence, not theft. The message cut deep. Success justifies everything. Failure has no excuse. On the battlefield, being caught meant death, not just for you, but for everyone beside you. The training made sure that lesson was branded into flesh. This wasn't simply training soldiers. It was manufacturing predators. Fast, sharp, calculating, stripped of ordinary morality. In their world, right and wrong dissolved into one question: did you succeed or not? They learned to lie, to vanish, to read weakness, and to obey without hesitation. They were indeed brothers, but brothers bound by pain, rivalry, and fear. Starvation and theft were only the opening chapters. The next lessons were far darker, designed to break the child's mind before rebuilding it. The human body adapts quickly to hunger, cold, and blows. But the real war was waged inside the skull. Sparta didn't just need muscle. It needed minds honed to blades, spirits emptied of self, loyal only to the state. Having conquered the body, the instructors now targeted the soul. Their weapon was silence. Our word, laconic, meaning brief in speech, comes from this region of Sparta. That's no coincidence. Spartan children were taught that words were tools, not toys. Talking idly, making a foolish remark, or asking a pointless question was punishable. Teachers hurled questions meant to provoke sharp, precise answers. Hesitation or dullness was met not with words, but with pain. Sometimes the instructor would bite the offender's thumb, a small but unforgettable lesson in thinking before speaking. Silence became armor. Every word had to strike like an arrow. Yet, the worst cruelty didn't always come from their elders. It came from each other. The training pyramid guaranteed that. Older boys ruled the younger ones like tyrants, commanders, jailers, and tormentors all rolled into one. At meals, they launched verbal ambushes. Who is the bravest man in Sparta? What do you think of the king's last campaign? Is theft honorable? There were no right answers, only traps. A stumble, a pause, or the wrong tone invited ridicule or blows. Humiliation was public, constant, and deliberate. This was not random bullying. It was institutionalized cruelty. A state-designed system to forge minds that could stay cold under interrogation or chaos. Each child learned to think like a politician and fight like a beast. They walked a minefield of words and glances where one mistake meant pain or exile. Rivalry was fuel. Aggression earned respect. Trust no one. Expose others' weaknesses. Hide your own. These were commandments. It was the law of the pack supervised by the state itself. All this daily brutality led to one of the most horrifying rituals of all, the ceremony at the altar of Artemis. The goddess demanded a bloody offering. Cheeses were placed upon her altar. The boys' task was simple in theory: run, grab them, and escape. But to reach the altar, they had to sprint through a gauntlet of whips. Leather lashes sliced through the air, tearing flesh with every step. It wasn't a contest of speed or reflexes. It was a test of one thing alone: how much agony a future Spartan could endure without breaking. The true test was never about stealing cheese. It was about standing silent under the whip, enduring agony without a scream, a tear, or the faintest sign of weakness. To cry out was to disgrace yourself. Historians described young Spartans dying at the altar, smiling as their lifeblood soaked the ground, dying proud because they had proven they were worthy. This was their graduation, the final ceremony, a baptism by blood meant to purge every trace of fear and softness, forging men into living steel. But when a society burns away every weakness, what fragments of humanity are left behind? What remains of the soul after it's been hammered into a weapon? What Sparta created was a paradox. Men of unmatched strength yet emotionally hollow. Warriors of flawless discipline yet warped morality. In their world, killing could be honorable and compassion could destroy you. They were the perfect instruments of violence. And now the state demanded proof that they could serve its darkest needs. That proof came through something few dared to even mention, the secret police. It wasn't a traditional military unit. It didn't fight in formation. It was something far more sinister. A covert death squad. A machine of fear designed to keep Sparta's internal enemy silent. To understand it, you have to grasp Sparta's greatest obsession, control. A small warrior class ruled over an immense population of enslaved people who outnumbered them many times over. The Spartans lived with the constant terror of revolt. Their answer was terror, calculated and preemptive. Each year, a select group of elite graduates, the strongest, most cunning, and utterly ruthless, were sent into the countryside with only a dagger and a few scraps of food. They were ordered to hide by day, move by night, and kill without hesitation their prey, the slaves. But not just any slave. Only the boldest, the most capable, those who dared to rise above the rest. These young men became the scythe that cut down any stalk taller than the field. This was their final exam, their last transformation. To murder an unarmed man under the cover of darkness wasn't combat. It was psychological surgery, a brutal ritual meant to prove that mercy had been completely erased from their hearts. They were no longer killing out of rage or defense. They killed because the state told them it was necessary. And to make it all legal, the Spartan government performed a chilling ritual of its own. Each year, the ruling magistrates formally declared war on the slave population. It was a bureaucratic act with monstrous implications. Once declared enemies, slaves could be slaughtered without it counting as murder. The killers weren't criminals. They were soldiers carrying out the will of the state. A convenient fiction that turned mass murder into civic duty. By the time his dagger was stained with blood, the Spartan had completed his transformation. He had been born as a child of the state, shaped by discipline, stripped of emotion, and now proven capable of killing without hesitation. But what had he become? The defender of civilization or its most efficient predator. At 30, he could finally leave the communal barracks. But his so-called freedom was an illusion. A new duty awaited him, to reproduce. To raise the next generation of instruments for Sparta's war machine, the killer now had to become a father. His bride, chosen by the state, was not a submissive wife, but his equal in strength and conviction. Spartan women were not victims of the system. They were its pillars. While boys endured the training, girls entered their own regimen, one equally rigorous and ideologically charged. In a Greece where women were often confined and silenced, Spartan women stood apart. They were educated, physically trained, and taught to manage property and estates. Why? Because Sparta's focus was not on comfort, but on breeding strength. Everything, every child, every law, every marriage, served one purpose, to forge a race of perfect warriors. Even famous philosophers observing from afar admired this system, believing it mirrored a vision of an ideal society. But they misunderstood it. The aim wasn't equality. It was efficiency and reproductive precision. Spartan women were molded to suppress tenderness and replace it with fierce patriotism. Their worth was judged not by affection, but by the caliber of warriors they gifted to the state. They became legends of cold discipline. A Spartan mother handing her son his shield before battle would tell him, "Return with it or upon it." When news of defeat reached the city, other mothers wept. Spartan mothers demanded to know only one thing: did we win? One tale tells of a woman who killed her own son for returning home in disgrace. They weren't passive bystanders. They were the guardians of Spartan ideology itself. With minds and bodies shaped by the state, marriage in Sparta wasn't an act of love. It was an engineered ritual. The process resembled an abduction. The groom didn't court his bride. He seized her in the night. Her attendants shaved her head, dressed her in a man's cloak and sandals, and left her waiting in darkness on a bed of straw. He came secretly, fulfilled his duty quickly, and returned to the barracks before sunrise. This strange ceremony had a purpose. It ensured emotional detachment. It kept domestic affection from interfering with military loyalty by making their meetings brief and secret. The state believed passion would remain high, and conception more likely, without the distraction of love or comfort. It was the pinnacle of the Spartan system. Two products of indoctrination, male and female, joined in darkness, bound not by love, but by decree. Their mission was singular, to reproduce strength. A perfect soldier paired with a perfect mother, the human assembly line of Sparta. Yet within this perfection lay a slow and silent poison. For 3 centuries, the machine worked flawlessly. Sparta dominated Greece, its warriors unmatched, its discipline legendary. But the flaw that would destroy it wasn't foreign. It was bred into the system itself. The first poison was a collapse in population. Sparta's ruthless breeding program, the abandonment of weak infants, and the rejection of all imperfection created a narrow gene pool. Every warrior lost in battle was an irreplaceable tragedy. The loss of decades of training and a carefully preserved bloodline. Other cities could raise new armies. Sparta could not replace 100 of its equals. Their greatest strength, their elite exclusivity, became their fatal weakness. They were breeding themselves out of existence. The second poison was inflexibility. The training created impeccable soldiers but not thinkers. Sparta produced warriors who could follow orders flawlessly but not innovate, not question. As warfare evolved, their rigid system remained frozen. They were perfect soldiers trapped in a world that demanded generals. When confronted by new tactics and creative minds, they found themselves fighting ghosts of their own past. And the final blow came with success itself. When Sparta finally triumphed over its rivals, wealth poured into their city. Gold and silver, the very things their laws had forbidden, corroded their iron discipline. Land ownership became concentrated. Greed replaced simplicity, and corruption seeped into every rank. Spartans who once despised luxury became enslaved by it. The spirit of Sparta, built on equality and hardship, began to rot from within. Then came the battle that changed everything. On a fateful plain, a brilliant opposing general shattered centuries of Spartan invincibility. Instead of spreading his forces thin, he concentrated them and rammed straight into the Spartan line where the king stood. Innovation crushed rigidity. The unbreakable formation collapsed. For the first time in living memory, a Spartan king fell in battle, his army annihilated beside him. Sparta's power was broken. With hundreds of its finest men dead, the city's warrior caste was crippled beyond recovery. The empire that had terrified the world for generations faded into irrelevance. By later eras, Sparta had become little more than a curiosity, a living museum where travelers came to watch reenactments of its brutal customs, echoes of a once great civilization. In the end, the tale of Spartan breeding practices is more than history. It's a warning. A people so obsessed with perfection that they sacrificed everything human to achieve it. They succeeded in creating the perfect warrior, and in doing so, sealed their own extinction. The machine that forged heroes eventually consumed itself, leaving behind nothing but ruins and the whisper of a greatness built on cruelty and undone by its own perfection.